For those of us who have studied a foreign language, one of the most difficult questions to answer is, how long does it take to learn French? The person innocently asking this question, well, they think it's a simple one, but it's actually quite a complicated question to answer. And in this video, we're going to talk about why. All right, bonjour tout le monde. Welcome back to We in France. I'm Diane. And first, before we get started, I just want to point out that what I'm talking about here, it applies to any language. Here on this channel and my blog, I often refer to French in my content just because it's my second language and I live here in France. But what I discuss here in this video is by no means specific to the French language. It applies probably to most languages. All right, so these following questions, they all make me take a deep breath before answering. So here we go. How long does it take to learn French? Are you fluent yet? How'd you learn French? How long does it take to learn a language? And most of the time when I've gotten these types of questions, the person asking has never seriously studied a foreign language before, because I feel like if they had, they'd see how problematic or even tricky the questions are. They are tricky to answer, truth be told. They're full of nuance. So asking someone how long does it take to learn French, it assumes that language learning is finite, that it has an end date, and that this learning phase at some point in the future finishes. I feel like questions like this, they also imply that language learning works something like this. One day you wake up, you decide you want to learn a language, then you take all the necessary steps to learn that said language, and then boom, one day, somewhere in the future, you have this milestone, and you're done. You have learned the language, learning is finished, and you speak the language perfectly. Except that's really not an accurate trajectory. Language learning doesn't work like that. Definitely not for me, probably not for you either. And one point I want to stress, language learning doesn't have an end date. I'll always be learning French. There's always more to know, and not to mention culturally, well, French culture is so intertwined with the language that learning the language alone without focusing on that cultural aspect, it's only half the battle. But moving on to talk about, are you fluent yet? Now, I feel like the asker probably means no harm and is genuinely curious, but there are levels of fluency, and when that question, are you fluent yet, is asked in the early days, your first year or two abroad, it can kind of make you really stress out, right? Because the use of yet, it implies that at some point in the future, you're expected to be fluent. Are you cutting it as a foreigner living abroad? But that's not the case for everyone. Not everyone is going to learn a foreign language to fluency just because they live there. And second of all, what is fluency? Is fluency being able to live in a country with ease and be able to handle yourself in pretty much every situation? Or is it giving a technical presentation on, say, physics or another more complicated topic with intricate vocabulary? Is it speaking in stops and starts, but with perfect grammar? Or is it speaking fluidly, but with mistakes? There's a spectrum. And besides that, I feel like we also need to ask ourselves, is fluency a requirement to live abroad? I don't know. Is it inevitable that a person's going to naturally pick up the language after so many years in a specific country? Because when you ask someone, are they fluent yet? It's almost like the asker is forcing those implications onto the person in a way. And like I said, in the early days, that can feel kind of weird on the receiving end. Okay, so to the question, do you speak French? Yes, I speak French fluently. But back a few years ago, we were at a mussel sanctuary in the Charente-Maritime. And the French tour guide asked us, before kicking off the tour, do you speak French? For Tom, as a native, my husband, he said yes. I also said yes as a French speaker. And for the tour guide, the answer could only fall into two categories. Do you speak French? Yes or no? Two absolutes. Very black and white for her, right? You either speak French or you don't. But for me, 80% of the time, the answer is a shade of gray, somewhere in the middle between that black and white absolute. And that's what language acquisition is all about, that nuance. Do I know every single word about mussel biology? And mussel, I'm talking about the mollusks, the sea creature. Do I know every word with mussel biology? Of course not. And it kind of begs the question, would a native speaker even know all these terms? Maybe not, but we're harder on ourselves sometimes, right? But for the people giving the presentation in French and them not speaking any other language, that question was really important. And to them, it was simple. Do you speak French or not? And like I said, the truth is, yes, I speak French fluently at this point, but you might lose me a bit when you get into the intricacies of a mussel's digestive system. Those aren't words that I'm just going to know off the back of my hand, But I feel like there's a better way to ask these questions. So maybe people can ask not how long does it take to learn French? And not how long does it take to become fluent? Those questions aren't so easy to answer, and they're going to vary based on a lot of factors. I think better questions that are maybe easier to answer and more helpful, instead of how long does it take to learn French, they might be something like this. How long did it take you to be conversational in French? And FYI, when I came to France, I had a low intermediate level across the board that was on paper, but it took me a solid 18 to 24 months. I would say a solid 2 years before I felt comfortable. That's just me. Questions like, how long until you felt confident speaking French? How long did it take you to understand French people on the phone? What learning methods helped you improve your French comprehension? Questions like that, I feel, are a little more helpful and maybe a little easier to answer. Now, of course, before we can answer any of these questions, there are so many factors that play into the answer, such as your current level in the language, your previous exposure to the language, the intensity of how much you study, how much effort are you putting into it, your methods of study, your overall motivation level, and your exposure to the language outside of the designated study time. And another important one is, why are you learning this language? Is it for survival, for your studies, for love, for work, for something else? And just to give you an example, here's how much formal learning time a beginner might expect to need to learn English according to Common European Framework, just to give you a ballpark, right? So I'm going to put that image up on screen. But even after level C2, is learning ever done? No. I learn new words, etymologies, linguistical facts, cultural nuances, and all these things in French all the time. And even in my native language, I still learn. So in French, of course I'm still learning. And any way you cut it, language learning could be overwhelming. It could be a joy. It could be frustrating as heck, satisfying, eye-opening. It could be fun, and it could also be work. It's all of those things. It's definitely a challenge. And above all, it is constant. So I guess to answer that original question, how long does it take to learn French? How long did it take you? My answer is it's constant. I'll always be learning. As long as I'm in France, interacting in French, I'm going to still be learning. And I learn more and more every single day, even now, even when I'm not actively studying French. And that's the truth. So I want to hear from you down below. Did you learn a foreign language as an adult? I want to hear about it. And I want to hear your take on how long it takes to learn a language. And again, it's nuanced. I know it's a big question, but I'd love to hear from you. And I want to leave it here for today. Also, if you enjoy my content here on We in France, give me a thumbs up, hit that like button there, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you back here on We in France soon. Salut!